Then the galactic underworld starts in January 1999. Then this universal one starts at 20, and it all ends in October, somewhere between 2011 or 2012. That's what they say. So you're going to see a whole lot of books, including one I wrote, that's coming out here in the next few months that are all talking about 2012, because there's some kind of thing that suggests that there's a convergence and there's some larger kind of thing going on here that where 2012 opens up a whole new era in terms of human beings and how we live. It's not the end of the world, but it's a whole new era. So we're into this period of time right now, by the Mayans at least, that between November the 19th of last year to June of this year. They call it the fifth night. The nights are not the good times. The days are the good times. But the night one, this is the dark night of the soul. They say, well, energy of darkness will reassert itself. The U.S. government probably will attempt to regain the Mayans weren't saying the U.S. government. The guys who are interpreting this are saying the U.S. government will attempt to regain control through force, and they'll try to bring the planet back to materialism. What you've got to get in your mind here is this: if in fact we're on the edge of this extraordinary kind of transition, that there's a new world that evolves that doesn't operate in any way that's familiar to the old world. Right? If you're a single cellular organism and you're trying to think about what the next era is going to be like, and you're looking around you, everything you see looks like single cellular organisms, and you're never going to get in your head, in your little single cellular head, what multiple cellular life would look like, right? That's the idea. The notion is that if you're sitting down here before you go up to that world, when you're trying to look up there, it doesn't make any sense in any of the terms that make sense down here. So if we are in fact sitting at the transition to a new world, what we're essentially stuck with is working our way into some space that is going to fundamentally change who we are and how we think of ourselves. And there is going to be attempts to pull you back to the old thing. So when they talk about the government and other trying to bring the planet back to materialism, there's going to be people aren't going to sit there and wait for that all to happen. They're going to fight it, and so there are going to be struggles through this transition. It's not an easy transition. So if you get up to this universal level, when you get at this next thing, each day and night, each one of those periods of time that used to be millions of years long is only 18 days long, and you get major changes every 2.5 weeks, and humanity regains the ability to perceive everything in the universe as sacred. This is really hard to wrap your head around, and you don't have to do it, but you know, if you struggle with these things and you try to think about them, you got to say, what might that world look like? How would it be different? How could it be fundamentally different than where we are right now? And the presumption has to be that it is going to be really different than the way we live right now. It is not going to be familiar. So you're into space where, you know, you don't have a whole lot of friends, frankly, because a lot of people say, oh, you're crazy, and that's stupid, and that's never going to happen, and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of where we operate. We try thinking out, what is this going to be? Now, there's an interesting kind of model for this, and my friend Hal put off again last week said. He said, it's like the whole world was ice. And I looked for a picture. Here's an Elvis. This is an ice Elvis in Las Vegas, right? So the whole world is ice. So if you were an ice person, all right, and everybody around you was ice, and somebody came to you and said, you know, there's a transition at about 32 degrees or some other kind of thing. And by the way, you just go right up to 32 degrees and nothing happens, and then boom, you get this boom. You know the science and how that works, the physics? It just changes really quickly, and then it turns to water. And if everybody was telling you, all these other ice people, you know, you'd say to the ice people, you'd say, I mean, this could really change in a hurry, and we could all become something different. And they'd say, what would they say? Huh? They're crazy. You know, they'd say, you're crazy. I mean, it doesn't, but that's the dynamic. That's the essential kind of character of what we're getting into if all of these historical kind of relationships hold true. So what kind of a world do we live in? What we live in is a world that is not deterministic. This is really hard to understand, but it is not deterministic. A lot of people, scientists for a long time, thought the world was like a clock, right? One thing determined another one. If you could figure out all of the pieces, then it was just like a clock in it. And you could figure out what time it was going to be 10 years from now because it was one thing determined another one. It's not like that. It's not how it works. It's not linear. You know what linear is? You know a curve that goes just straight like that? So much change gives you over so much time, gives you drive up the curve. No, it's not linear. It's non-linear. It's like a pendulum, right? Because it goes one way and then it stops and goes the other way and go on, and or a parabola or a convex relationship. Maybe it goes. If it's non-linear, if it's a non-linear system, maybe you get a tipping point. Maybe it goes like this and then goes boom. Or goes up, or some other kind. You get instabilities in the system. Maybe that's what's happening to the environmental system, to the climate system. But in any case, the reality is not linear. So when somebody wants you to predict and say, look what might go on, it's crazy. It's fundamentally crazy to try to do that thing because that's not how the system works. I mean, it's like the temperature, If you thought the temperature was going to keep going like that, and then all of a sudden 1 year it loses 20 years worth of the temperature gain. I mean, it's a different kind of place. It's not known. We don't know what's going on. All you've got to do is look back in history, and at every period in history, they thought they knew what was going on, and they were wrong. I mean, 100 years ago, they were probably, they want to bleed you because they thought that was a good way to get you better if you weren't feeling well. And on and on and on, and whether it's in social terms or other thing, they didn't let you vote or they lynched blacks or whatever it was. We've always, people thought they were right at the time and they weren't. We don't know what's going on. We've got the best ideas we got at the time, but if you want to be honest about all this, you got to step yourself back and say, hey, this is as best as we know, but there's just about a 99% chance that this moves into something else. And if you're writing an exponential churn, you're going to find out that this really doesn't operate in the same way that we think it operates. It's also unpredictable. It's not predictable. It's intrinsically not predictable. I can show you Nobel Prize level science that says that it's intrinsically unpredictable. So that means no matter how bad all these trends are that I told you at the beginning of this little presentation, is that is not what the future is. Not necessarily at all. It means that there's any number of things could come out of this thing, and if you're going to go out of here being funky and all depressed, you're wrong, because that's not the end point. That this thing is open-ended, that this can go any of a number of kind of ways. And by the way, that's the way it's always happened in the past. That things happen that you just can't anticipate, that you don't see. There's big change comes along. You get breakthroughs that you didn't anticipate. Extraordinary things change. What kind of world is it that we live in? We live in a world that is intrinsically complex. Complexity, the science of complexity. And what it does is that you don't know. You get nonlinear relationships and other kinds of stuff, and the level of complexity is amazing. It's extraordinary. You can't even begin as human beings to wrap your head around what that means. I mean, scientists have huge hubris. I mean, they have egos that are amazing when they think they have got it all figured out and they know what happened in the Big Bang and all that kind of business. I mean, there's nobody there. They don't know. They're just guessing, I mean, they really are. It's the best guess that they got and all that, but they don't know how that happened. It's intrinsically emergent. That means it comes from the pieces and come and mix and match, and this tries and then this works and this doesn't work, and so then it works its way up, and finally you get something that came up and you got no way of knowing how that happened. That's the way this stuff all happens. There's no George Bush doesn't sit up above and say, this is the way it's going to happen in the Mideast, and we're going to do this in Iraq, and it's all going to work out. No, it's very emergent in Iraq. That's the way it isn't predictable. It's very connected. What Hal Puthoff, my scientist friend, will say to you if you get him over a beer sometime, he'll say, when you look at the underlying fabric and the science underlying the physics, everything is connected to everything else. And he says, and I'm not talking to you in some abstract term, I'm telling you in literal kind of terms that everything is connected to everything else in this universe and in this planet. That's really, we think of ourselves as being divorced, as separate, right? And that's how we define ourselves. We define that I am me and you are you and all that kind of stuff. And science is starting to figure out that, no, we're all interconnected and we're all related to it. And in fact, what we are is a single entity at one level. And this is not just crazy metaphysical woo-woo New Age stuff, Although it is that too. No, I know the science, they're coming, the philosophers and the theologians and the scientists are all working their way around and they're saying, hey, we're all connected and we're all together. And you think of yourself and you're saying you're working up this transition and this exponential curve and you're going to have a big rate of change and you start to see these things and maybe that's the early indications of how we start to define ourselves in this new world that's coming along. This idea of oneness, that we're all part of each other, that we're all connected in one way or another, that we can't mess with somebody on the other, kill a whole bunch of people on the other side of the world and it doesn't affect us in some kind of a way. No, we're all interconnected in some kind of way. Essentially, there's some philosophers and theologians who look at this and they say that this notion of oneness, if you could ever really connect and realize that we're all connected to each other, that it would resolve all major human issues and it would do it very, very quick. Would you do bad things to somebody if you thought they were really yourself, that it would affect you and that it were really a part of you? I know it's a real switch and it's a mind game that you got to play, but that's the essential nature, trying to how you get from here to there and what this might be. But the idea is that if you have this kind of a twist that was supported by the science that said, we're really not what we thought we were, how would we act in it? How might that new world up there operate? Peter Russell says the global brain is awakening, that in fact what we're doing is connecting people together, and it's not only the internet but other kinds of ways, and what you've got is a global nervous system, a global neural system, you've got a global brain, and what it's doing is emerging and coming together in this emergent kind of process. And if you look historically back at all these major transitions, what you can see is that in the Stone Age it was built around myths and mythic civilizations. It was local, primarily local. And then the archaic area was theos, where it's theological, theocratic, and it started to get larger and regional. And then the Greeks came up with the logos, where they started to talk about reasoning and the age of reasoning. It became planetary then. And of course, we're working our way out of the back end of the age of reasoning and planet in this new civilization. Maybe it's holograph. Holos. It's holos. There's another word in there that I can't think of. But it's all inclusive. That we're all part of the whole thing, and that there's an interdependency in here, and that the whole cosmos is interconnected in some kind of a way. And it's not. I mean, you look at the logic: local, regional, planetary, cosmos. I mean, it makes sense in kind of in reason, logical terms. So we're going into some space that's really quite different. So what should we all do about this, huh? I'm about ready to quit here. This is an epochal shift. This is extraordinary. This is a punctuation in the evolution of our species, and what you need is a new paradigm, a new perspective, a personal paradigm that allows you to look into this space and make sense of it in yourself. If you've tied all your sense of self, of security and self into external organisms like the government and companies and the economy and so on, you got problems, because that's going to not work very well in this transition. And so what you need is a personal paradigm, a new perspective, a new framework for living and working together in this new world. That's going to happen in a hurry too. And so you start to look out and say, what might that be and where are we going? Richard Eckersley says that there are 3 responses to big change. So here are the options, right? So you look at all this stuff coming and you say, what in the world? And you could have nihilism, right? You could say you abandon all belief in society and